Hey, how's it going? I'm Seth, and this is my Felix 5 Boots deck, which also can stand as a Gaunty Canny Inquisitor deck, or Nine Fingers Keen, but I have never actually swapped them as commanders, but they would technically work as the commanders for this deck. But anyways, I'm just going to get right into it. So, commander here is Felix 5 Boots, 5 mana, and he's a 5/4 with Menace and Ward 2, so pretty good right off the bat. And his second line of text is, if a creature you control dealing combat damage to a player causes... Sorry, whoa, that's just got weirded out. If a player you control dealing combat damage to a player causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. A lot of words. That basically means if a creature you control hits somebody else and you have a triggered ability off of it, it's just going to happen again. That trigger is just going to happen again. That's all that means. Just a little wordy there. We've got Flare for ramp. We've got Flare of Cultivation and Snapping Voidcraw. Just some cheap little guys to boost your mana base. You know, maybe later in the game, Snapping Voidcraw will let you draw cards. Just little guys that don't really have, you know, too much to do with the deck, but they get your stuff going. Next up, we have got some token. So this is just Moonblade Shinobi. There are other tokens in the deck, but I have them in like separate piles for like finishers and whatnot. But whenever this deals combat damage, and it also has ninjutsu, so if you declare blocker that's like maybe not super, you know, scary, then you ninjutsu this out, and then you get this guy in. Whenever he deals damage, you'll create a 1/1 blue illusion with flying, so you'll make 2 off of Felix, thankfully. But yeah, just get some blockers out, maybe some more hitters if you want to ping your opponents. Next up, we've got some protection. You know, if you're getting swung at early game or later game and you just, you know, it's an aggro deck, it's an aggressive deck, so you might not have a bunch of blockers up. We've got Lull, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. You do that on somebody else's turn to make sure you don't die, or you can even do it on your turn in the case that you don't want your creatures to die. Next up, we've got some Anthem, and really just draw, honestly. Garruk's Uprising, he gives all creatures you control trample, and then when this enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you get to draw, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters, you draw a card. There's some pretty big guys in this deck, so, you know, having Garruk's Uprising out never hurts, especially with a combat trigger deck. You're either going to want to make your guys unblockable or make sure they have trample so you can get that damage over your opponent's creatures and get your combat triggers out. Then we've got some recursion. We've got Nashi, Searcher in the Dark. Whenever he deals combat damage, you're going to mill however much damage he dealt, and then you can return enchantments and legendary creatures from your graveyard to your hand. And if you don't put any, then you put +1/+1 counter on Nashi, and like I said, off of Felix, that's going to happen twice. Springleaf Avenger, whenever he deals combat damage, you'll return a permanent from graveyard to hand, and same thing where he's got ninjutsu, so, you know, send him in, you know, after blockers are declared. If you got somebody that isn't blocked, then he comes in and you get some stuff from your graveyard back. Then we've got Tutor, Ayara's Oathsworn, and yet again, it's another combat trigger, which is really nice to have. If she's out and you have Felix out, then you can get her trigger in 1 turn. Whenever she deals combat damage, or 2 turns technically, whenever she deals combat damage to a player, if it has fewer than 4 +1/+1 counters on it, then put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has exactly 4 +1/+1 counters, you just get to tutor a card. So, you know, 2 turns, you have Felix and Ayara's Oathsworn out, you ping them 2 times, you have 4 +1/+1 counters because that'll trigger twice. So you'll put 1 on her and then another on her. Next turn, do it again. Turn after that, you get to tutor for 2 cards, which is really good. Then we have got some protection over here, and really destruction more than anything, not really protection. But we've got Windgrace's Judgment. For any number of opponents, destroy target non-land permanent that player controls. You just get to choose your opponents, destroy 1 thing each of them have. Really nice to have. Demon of Loathing. Whenever it deals damage to a player, they have to sacrifice a creature. If they've, you know, got too much out, then hit him with this bad boy. Pretty good. And then finally, Trigon Predator. It's going to destroy your opponent's artifacts and enchantments. Really nice to have, you know, some enchantments make it really pesky. I mean, in this deck where it's aggro, cards like, you know, Windborne Muse, and then Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, they're really going to hinder your ability to deal damage and get that combat damage trigger, so Trigon Predator comes really in handy. Then we have got some of the core pieces of this deck. Now there's a lot of these. I'm just going to go through them real quick. So like I said, Gonti, as well as Nine Fingers Keen. They could be swap commanders if you would like. I know Gonti is already the precon commander for Thunder Junction. And then I think Felix is the swap commander for that, actually. But I pulled him from a pack and I bought Gonti individually. But Gonti is going to make it so you're sealing your opponent's cards, and then you can cast them as long as they're exiled. Nine Fingers Keen, you're going to look, when she deals combat damage, you're going to look through the top 9 cards of your library, get a gate out, and I do have, I believe, 10 gate cards in this deck, so you get 1 gate card, put it onto the battlefield, and then once you have 9 or more gates, then you just get to draw all those cards, which is really nice to have. I don't think I've ever gotten that off, though. I don't believe I've ever gotten the 9 gates out. Then we got Psychic Frog. Deals combat damage, draw a card. You know, Felix is out, you draw 2 cards. Really nice to have. And then also, you can give it flying, and you can give it +1/+1 counters. So really, really, really good card to have. Just buffing it up, giving it flying, making it a good blocker. Toski. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, you draw a card. Just more draw. You know, you're going to be drawing a bunch of cards, ideally, so you can get more stuff out. Artful Dodge, as well as Invisibility. You're making your guys unblockable. They can't be blocked, so there's no worry. You're going to get your combat triggers in. Same thing with Champion of Lamholt. If she's out, and then, you know, you're putting more and more and more creatures out, buffing her up, then your opponents, hopefully, aren't going to be able to block unless they're playing a counters deck. Oron Frostfang is going to give each of your attacking creatures Death Touch, which, you know, really makes it so your opponents don't want to block your guys, as well as whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you'll draw a card. So, you know, same thing as Toski, where you're just going to be drawing off of your creatures dealing damage. Wormhole Serpent, it's, again, like Invisibility. You're just making sure that, you know, target creature can't be blocked this turn. It's just really nice to have. And then Silent Hole Creeper, it already cannot be blocked. And then you can choose one of these 3. And then, you know, if Felix is out, you can choose 2 of them at once. You can't choose 1 twice because, you know, you have to choose one that hasn't been chosen. But you can put 2 counters on it. You can draw a card off of it. And you can also have it become a copy of another target creature you control. But once that happens, then technically you don't have a Silent Hall Creeper anymore. You just have a copy of whatever creature it becomes a copy of. Really nice to have if you have... like Champion of Lamholt out, and, you know, she's a big target, or on Frostfang, and you just want to get that, you know, a second one, just so you can get that more draw, and make sure that if one of them dies, then you still have that Death Touch on attack. It's really nice to have. Next up, we will finally move to finishers, and I've actually got 2 sections for finishers, because I have one combo in this deck that will, I kid you not, kill an opponent in 1 turn, if I did my math right, and I'm an engineering student, so hopefully I did my math right. For finishers, we've got Atrata the Silencer. She's going to make it so when she deals combat damage to a player, you're going to exile a creature they control with a hit counter on it. And then if a creature, when Atrata's out, if a player, an opponent, has 3 or more cards exiled with hit counters on it, they just lose the game. If you have if you have Ayara's Oathsworn and you're tutoring for Atrata each time, really funny to have. I don't think I've ever killed anybody by Atrata, but there is also, right here actually, Mari, the Killing Quill. She will also exile creatures with hit counters on it, so you don't even need to use Atrata for it. As long as you get them out, as long as you exile cards with hit counters on them off of Mari, and then you hit them with Atrata, they just lose. Like, you didn't even need to hit them more than 1 time with Atrata. They just straight up lose the game. Which is funny, but, you know, she gets targeted very, very, very often. Then we have Giant Ataphage. Whenever this guy deals combat damage to a player, you make a token copy of him, and that'll happen twice. And so it's an exponential by 3, so you'll just continually make more. After your first turn with hitting with him, you'll have 3 of them. After that, if you hit with all of them, you'll have 9, 27, 81. It goes crazy. Necropolis Regent. flying, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, you put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So if I swing and hit you with Felix, he'll get 5 counters on it, and then he'll also get an additional 5 counters on it because it triggers twice. Then we got some mill. We've got Mirko Vosk, Mind Drinker. When he deals combat damage, your opponent is going to mill effectively a lot of their deck. They're going to mill until they mill 8 lands. Well, technically, they'll mill until they mill 4 lands, and then if you have Felix out, they'll do it again. So, ideally, if their deck is well shuffled and, their lands are spread out, then hopefully they'll mill like half their library in one turn, and then you can just continue to ping them with Mirko, as well as the Mind Skinner. Cannot be blocked. It's a 10/1 for 3 mana. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. So, unfortunately, this is the only downside to having Mind Skinner in this deck. When Mind Skinner deals damage, you actually prevent it. When any source you control deals damage, you'll prevent it. So, what happens is Felix will double the Mind Skinner's trigger, but Felix will not trigger, or any other combat trigger will not happen. Like, say Mirko Vosk, Mind Skinner, and Felix are all out. If I deal damage with Mirko, I'm actually not going to get Mirko's combat trigger damage because it's prevented off of Mind Skinner. However, they will mill that many cards off of Mind Skinner, and Felix will double it. Kind of sucks, but, it is what it is, especially for swinging with Mind Skinner. Each opponent is going to mill 20 cards in one turn. Kind of crazy, but yeah, that's the only downside to having Mind Skinner. If you have him out, then you can only make your opponents mill. You don't get any drawing. You don't get any counters if you have, say, Necropolis Region out. That's it. So it's a kind of win-lose scenario. Really depends on your board state and your opponents and whatever they've got out. But yeah, that's about it. And then finally, one of my favorite pieces of this deck is Unstoppable Slasher, Grievous Wound, and Quietus Spike. Now, these are 3 cards that do the exact same thing, but because one is a creature, one is an enchantment, and one is an artifact, equipment, you can do something really funny with them. So starting life total in the Commander format is 40 life. If you have Unstoppable Slasher out, and you equip Quietus Spike onto Unstoppable Slasher, and you're swinging at an opponent that happens to have Grievous Wound out, all these 3 cards have, whenever they deal damage, combat damage. Well, these 2 have whenever they deal combat damage, and this is whenever the player is dealt damage, they'll lose half their life rounded up. Now, the way it works is this will trigger twice, this will trigger twice, and this will trigger twice because I control all of these, even though Grievous Wound is on another opponent. So what ends up happening is Felix is going to trigger each of these twice. So Unstoppable Slasher is going to deal 2 damage. So you go from 40 life to 38, or for simplicity's sake, let's just say he deals it doesn't really matter the amount of damage he deals. He deals 2 damage, and then you go from 38 down to half of that, so you go down to 19. And then Quietus Spike, you go from 19, and since it's rounded up, you'll go down to 10. Or, no. Am I stupid? Am I mathing wrong? Yeah, it's rounded up, so you'll go from 19 to 9. And then Grievous Wound, you'll go from 9 to 4. And then Unstoppable Slasher will trigger again, this will trigger again, and Grievous Wound will trigger again. So you'll go from 5 to 2, 2 to 1, and 1 to 0. I've never gotten it. I've never pulled it off. I've gotten close. I think I've had Unstoppable Slasher and Grievous Wound out at the same time, but not with Quietus Spike. But yeah, it's an effectively instant kill if they're below a certain life total. After a certain amount of time, if somebody's playing a life gain deck and they have a bunch of life, I think it doesn't work once it's past 60 or something. I haven't really done all of the math. I've thought about it months ago at this point. But yeah, it is a cool combo to have. If you are able to pull it off, then it's really funny because you just, hit them once and then they're immediately dead. Anyways, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed, and that is about it. Have a good one.